Alright, so I recently uploaded a video talking about the format for the new 1v1 league. I have won exactly one trophy so far in 2 attempts, so I'm betting about 50-50, as you can see. It was yesterday, and then I recorded two videos. One was talking about the league, and one was actually running through the games, both sets. Something went wrong, and the video that had the games, which was supposed to be uploading all day, I came home to find out that it failed and the file was corrupted. So I'm going to try to recreate that, and I'm also going to talk about where the deck is now and point out that the deck wasn't in this exact place earlier. I had to, in the first set of games, I had some other cards. You'll see one of them comes up notably, and then there's a few other changes. So basically, here's where the deck is, and I don't want to talk too much about the deck because that's what the other video is for, but I just want to point out that we have lost significant things, and this build tries to make up for some of the losses or as best as it can without overdoing it. So probably the biggest four cards I mentioned in the other video to lose for any kind of control deck that doesn't just want to be an abundance of counter magic, which isn't really my style of control. I like more precision strikes and finesse. Is the loss of Strip Mine, the loss of which is one of the primary weapons against mono blue, and to some extent mono green, although it doesn't damage them anywhere near as much. Just gives you a second way to take out a guy's cradle, which can be very important. Winter Orb, which was this deck's kind of raison d'etre. It was the whole purpose of this deck. It was designed from start to finish to be a Winter Orb deck, so that is a big kick. It lost Mind Twist, which is huge to break the back of both control and combo, which I think are the two biggest threats that the format has now. Much more so than it did previously, although we'll see how much, because there is a deck floating around, a Kess control deck that may do enough of a job of breaking up combo that maybe it will keep combo suppressed. But in general, I think losing the Mind Twist was very painful. And I did not replace it in this version with Amnesia or not Mind Twist, but the other one, the Black X one. That's the same as a Mind Twist, but one extra black. That could still happen at some point. So that's on the table, but for now, we'll leave it alone. As far as the loss of the Orb, the next best card is, unfortunately, Armageddon. It's a great card, don't get me wrong, but it's nowhere near the fetch power of a Winter Orb. So as a result of that, I took out the Whir, which was designed to both fetch Orb or alternatively could work with the Orb by tapping it as part of the casting cost to get you a free untap. And there's no need to run Fire and Ice for the flexibility to either tap your opponent's mana then at the end of their turn and then drop your Winter Orb in play, or play a Winter Orb and tap it. And also, Fire Ice also had the utility of taking out a mana vault if your opponent sat on it for too long. But despite all those things, I think there are other cards to play. So Fire Ice is out without that synergy with Winter Orb, and Whir is out. And what we have in place is actually two additional counter spells. Spell Pierce is back in, and Stoic is back in. This was out for a little while. And the reason that these cards are in is because without Mind Twist, combo is really scary, and hopefully the increase in counter magic will help to mitigate some of that threat. And the deck does run land tax because I think it's pretty much ridiculous not to run land tax in an Armageddon deck. That's just kind of dumb, in my opinion. Although, I mean, you can make the case for it, but it's a very sketchy case. In a Winter Orb deck, it's a little bit more unlike, like you might argue for that a little bit more, but in an Armageddon deck, to me, I think if you put this Armageddon in, you just put land tax in. Now, the same isn't to be said for Scroll Rack, which is not currently in the deck. It would be a reasonable replacement for Sensei's Dividing Top, most likely, but I don't think it's necessarily mandatory. If we have circumstances where Dark Confidant just hurts too much because of Cruise and Dig, then Scroll Rack can come in. But for now, the rack is out, and that actually is replaced by Dig Through Time, and the Treasure Cruise replaces one of the other, I don't, oh, I think I actually just replaced the strip mine straight out and just dropped down to 31 lands. So anyway, I think I talked enough about it in the last video, but I just want to touch on major highlights and to mention also that I'm trying to get enough cards for enough tickets for picking up a foil Teferi, but it's going to be tough. They're overpriced right now. And then I also would like to get a the Spellseeker Mage, which fetches instant, which is an incredible card. It's much stronger than I thought in the last video. It fetches a 2 mana or less instant. It's a crazy flexible tutor card, similar to Trinket Mage. 1/1, so you can clamp it. It most likely could replace either Stoic Rebuttal or Worn Power Stone. So if it replaces Stoic Rebuttal, you're replacing a counterspell with a card that fetches counterspells, the best counterspell actually. And if it replaces Worn Power Stone, you're replacing a card that produces mana with a card that can fetch a card that will at least temporarily ramp your mana. So depending on what we need and how we argue it, I could see either swap being a legit decision. As for the Teferi swap, I actually don't know what should be swapped out for Teferi, and I'll leave that decision to a future episode. So let's take a look at these games now. Now this is going to be a little bit tougher for me because I didn't play any at all today, but I have my games from recent. So here they are. And as you can see, the first set did not go well, although for 5, I picked out 3, I managed to somehow scrape out 3 wins. And that's enough to get your prize entry back plus 1 treasure pack. So basically a lot of work for $2 is what it comes out to be, but it's better than losing. As for the next set, as you can see, 5-0. So I tried to play through this in the video that was corrupted, and actually a bunch of these games were corrupted on the replays. They were failing. I don't think it's related, but I'm just on the off chance that somehow it is. I am going to skip the first 5. But the one card that I had in there that I don't have is Amnesia, and in the final game I actually got Mana Drain into Amnesia, which was pretty awesome and brought me back, way back to the early or mid 90s when I used to do things like that, and how mid to late 90s rather, and how enjoyable that was. Anyway, I'm going to move straight into the next game. So give me just a moment. And I'll get this going. Sorry, I'm getting texted. And I'm going to get this game started. Sorry about that pause in the video. I don't mean to take up too much of your time. Alright, so my opponent here is playing Azusa Lost But Seeking, wins the die roll and gets to go first. I, on the other hand, have one of those madcap Mana Crypt draws. So I'm going to run out this way, and that way I have Swords to Plowshares up, which I thought I might need there. Unfortunately, my opponent has a Dissenter's Deliverance, so he's able to take out Mana Crypt, but at least I still have, I've missed a land drop, but at least I'm able to get a Grand Monolith down. Gets a Courser revealing Kozilek and is down to 3 cards in hand. So what I'm going to do is Mystical for Tithe, go grab 2 lands, hit my land drop, use the Mox off the other land drop, wait to see what my opponent's next card is, and then plow the Courser during the draw phase. That way he doesn't get to play the Ghost Quarter off the top, but I know it's there. Unfortunately, wow, even this game looks like it's going to bug out. So basically what happened there was that I plowed the Courser, and then my opponent made a play, which I was able to Spell Pierce. It looks like I'm not going to be able to walk you through this, but essentially I kind of worked my opponents down. Like he played a couple extra, he played his commander and another card, and I was able to Toxic Deluge and 2-for-1 my opponent. And at one point I get a window to scroll, Merchant Scroll for a Mana Drain, and my opponent doesn't want to cast into that, and he's down to eventually 1 card or 2 cards, not enough mana in play. One of the cards is a Kozilek that I'm cognizant of, and so able to play around, and my opponent just realizes that there's no going anywhere with that. Sorry for the replay bug, and hopefully game 2 goes a little smoother. And this was against Teferi Temporal Archmage. Definitely a threat. So I'm going to lead off a little bit with a little bit of a slow hand here, and what I'm going to hope to do is I'm going to try to stick this Stoneforge, and if not, then I get to run a counter out of my opponent's hand, and it sticks. Wow, really? That's awesome. So what that tells me, or at least what I'm thinking at this point, is that my opponent's probably got a lot of ramp in hand, not a lot of defensive counters, or all the counters they've got are 3 mana, but I'm thinking ramp, right? So I'm really excited about the stack Faden. So when they don't play any card here to ramp with, I'm kind of confused. And then I top deck Necro holding Urborg. So I play Volcanic Island, even though it means it could be threatened here. My opponent, Frantic, searches away an Exhaustion, which makes a lot of sense against a Stoneforge with the Sword of Feast and Famine. But on the other hand, they're now down a card. And so I'm going to start taking even more cards and make that real painful. I get to Tithe pre-combat and grab 2 cards. Play a tapped land, equip the sword, and... oh, sugar. He's got a bounce spell for my Stoneforge. I'm actually surprised he bounced it and didn't tap it, but I guess maybe he's going to counter it on the way down. So, yeah, because if he doesn't, I get to get another creature into play. So my opponent fetches a counter spell, and I go for Stoneforge, and my opponent counters it on the way down. Unfortunately for them, that's 5 mana, and it means I get to slam Urborg Necro, and of course I'm just going to Necro hard here. Against a mono blue player with no creatures in play. Also note that my opponent's on 4 lands, and I believe either missed a land drop last turn or is about to. So right now I just want to use Necro to ensure that I maintain control of this game. So I'm going to go ahead and dump a bunch of excess lands. I throw away Treachery and Jitte because neither of them necessarily have a ton of value against Teferi. My opponent plays a Cold Steel Heart, but still has missed a land drop. That makes that Dak Faden really good. Since the Dak Faden is really good, I'm going to lead with, I believe, Duretti. And my opponent, not willing to lose their Cold Steel Heart, remands it to buy time. But then I can just play Dak Faden, steal his card, and Necro even more cards. I don't care about card advantage when Necro's in play, only tempo. So stealing mana is much better than just destroying it with a reusable kill card. Much rather just take it and use it to deploy even more cards with the Necro going. So my opponent, in a bid to try to get something going here, plays Snapcaster Exhaustion. Unfortunately for my opponent, I still got a decent amount of mana here, and I Dak Faden into a Mox Opal on top of that. So I throw away a Felwar Stone, play a land, play a Mox Opal, fetch, only because I don't want to Necro the card that I might have actually fetched for, and pass. I decide I'm not going to play into trying to protect Dak Faden from the Snapcaster, because if I let him hit the Snapcaster and I counter a spell here, which is what I was expecting to do, then I have exactly 6 cards in the graveyard, and I can dig at the end of my opponent's turn and still keep my mana drain. So I dig into counter and another way to fetch counters. I'm going to try to take complete control of this game at this point, and I believe... no, opponent isn't giving up yet, but I believe this is the turn where the mana drain fuels an insane turn and my opponent packs it in. I made a mistake there. I should have played the Coalition off a Workshop. That was actually really bad. I played it off the free mana from mana drain, but that's just foolish. Alright, so we're going to go totally ape here. Sacking the Crypt because, you know, I do have Necro running and my life's a bit low. I thought about using copy here, but I decided that, so if I have exactly 8 mana up and a copy in my hand, I can Cryptic, and then I can Mystical Teachings for Force of Will and force with the copy. So I'm going to sit in the safe mode here, and if my opponent doesn't do anything, well, I drew a counter spell off that. I'm going to go ahead and map and charge a Relic. Or Mystical Teachings. Okay, so that's the memory for getting me. And the goal here, the reason I think I did the Mystical Teachings is that first of all, it spends more mana more efficiently, 1 more mana. So first of all, second of all, I can't go get a Strip Mine, so the only land I could go get would matter from this position is Throne of the High City, but I'm already Necroing, so drawing 2 cards getting basically my draw phase back is it's just 1 life per turn. It just says gain 1 life per turn. It's not really super significant. With that in mind, it's actually interesting, and occurs to me that perhaps the 32nd land might actually want to be the land that fetches artifacts and gains you 1 life per turn. That's an interesting idea, and I need to think about that further. But at any rate, so I fetched there because also, in addition to being able to go get, so I was going to go get another counterspell, Forbid, as a matter of fact, the best counterspell to get with the Necro. Then on my turn, what I was going to do is I could equip the sword, right? I can equip the sword, copy the sword, equip the copy, attack. When I damage my opponent, tap my mana to tap my lands to float for mana, resolve the first sword, tap a bunch more lands, resolve the second sword, and now with tons of mana floating, I can Mystical Teachings for whatever I want at that point. Sack the map, for example, and most likely at that point I go get Force of Will to go with Forbid and Counterspell. Or I go fetch a way to put an Armageddon in my hand. So either way, at that point, I think my opponent is super, super doomed. And my opponent, of course, realized like the handwriting was on the wall when the Teachings fires, because at a minimum, this represents 2 counterspells, and 2 counterspells against a Necropotence with only 4 cards in hand is, and one of them about to bleed out from the Feast and Famine, is just not enough to get anything going whatsoever. All right, so that was that game there. So game 3 was against SpencerBot 15. And sorry, I'm getting texted again. Maybe I should pause the game. So I made a huge mistake here. Sorry. Yeah, I didn't expect to get interrupted a bit during this. So here's the mistake I made. So I had 2 lands, and I had the option to not play the Felwar Stone and just cast either Merchant Scroll or sit on Disenchant. If my opponent left, my opponent only had the 1 mana, but they have the 1 mana? Yeah, my opponent had the 1 mana, but they paid to untap the Breeding Pool, and that should have told me. I was thinking, okay, they probably have Force Spike, but I was also thinking, like, okay, they could have Crop Rotation, they could have Brainstorm. It doesn't have to be a Force Spike, something like Opt. So I decided to go for it, and boom, Force Spike. Still, if I wanted to play it safe, I could have not run the Felwar Stone into an open blue like that, and that plays it safe because it means that my opponent paid 2 life to do nothing and waste their time. And as it turns out on this turn, if I still had 2 mana untapped here, when my opponent played Wild Growth on the Overgrown Tomb, I could have just disenchanted the Wild Growth and cost my opponent a mana here, and then let them Thoughtseize something else out of my hand. So we'll see what he takes. Takes a Duretti. I think that's probably wise. Just too risky for it to be in my hand, I guess. But yeah, I could have disenchanted that Wild Growth. My opponent wouldn't have 4 mana here. He'd have 3, which is certainly a better place to be. Unfortunately, so I Impulse, and oh, what a beautiful thing. My punish is fixed by finding a Wasteland. My opponent counters a Merchant Scroll, which was very wise on my turn. And if you're wondering which commander my opponent has that I'm so scared about, it's actually Leovold. So major threat always. Plays a Trinket and uses it to go get a Pithing Needle, interestingly enough. So I'm going to go ahead and slam Breya here. I know that my opponent can Needle it. My opponent then Chrome Moxes and almost has Threshold and has a Cephalid Colosseum. In fact, my opponent thinks that he has Threshold and tries to make me can't draw 3, discard 3, and instead ends up just using Pithing Needle to protect his Leo. So I'm going to go ahead and attack for 2 here, and then I want to clear out Leovold and get rid of the Pithing Needle, so that's what I do. This way, if my opponent wants to tap out for Leo, I could play Map and kill it. Opponent does do that. The problem, of course, is that I'm feeding my opponent cards here, and I decide I'm going to be trickier than that, not realizing exactly how this all is going to interact, and I end up paying a big price for it. So, some reason I don't kill Leovold here, which was a huge, huge mistake. And so when I vamp, I was thinking that I would get to keep at least 1 card, but I do not because I have to discard 3. I do get to draw 1 card, that's true, but the discard 3 part is the threat. It's not the anti-draw. So I end up losing the card I vamp for, which was Will. I was going to Will clear out everything he's got in play in 1 shot, but instead I now am having to fight through a Dark Confidant, who first found a Bird of Paradise and next found a Daze. Fortunately, my opponent's not really finding anything too significant and realizes that his life total is a little bit in danger. So I pass because I don't want to give my opponent a chance to block and kill his Dark Confidant. He flips a Force of Will with the Confidant. So if this play doesn't work and then cruises, if he'd flipped the cruise, I would have just killed him. But if this play doesn't work out, this gambit, my opponent's hand's getting full, more and more full. Opponent finds a Painful Truce, clearly can't cast that, and basically can't use his Polluted Delta or Llanowar Waste for too much here. Still has enough mana to play Snapcaster into a Cruise, which is disappointing, to say the least. And now has 7 cards in hand, but only 1 life. Still doesn't attack with Confidant, strangely enough. So I'm going to preordain knowing that I won't get the card. My opponent pierces. I'm not exactly clear on why, but I was just using this to scry, and I scry 2 more mana sources to the bottom. Scry 2, do nothing is still better than do nothing at all and just hold it. Opponent finally realizes the jig is up and he's got to try to beat me down with Confidant. I go ahead and eat the damage from that. Play a Soul Ring pre-combat, and just to set up so that I can... So here's the thing, my opponent actually has to counter every artifact I draw, because Breya plus an artifact means I can deal 3 to my opponent. So he has to actually counter the Soul Ring, and finally Dark Confidant's a Null Rod and goes to -1. A Null Rod which would have shut off Breya and opened up my opponent's options quite a bit if it weren't for the fact that it cost too much life for that Confidant. So a win that I pulled out, which really was in a 40 life format, would have been a loss, but fortunately they did get smart and lower the life total to 30 at least. I'm really concerned. Leovold's one of those other commanders that concerns me quite a bit about the format, just because it's a little too consistent and too broken, and it's too oppressive. The fact that nobody gets Mind Twist except for the Leovold player when they cast their Time Twister effect, of which there are many, is fairly disappointing actually, and kind of nuts. So like, you can't just top deck a Mind Twist and fix. If they Time Twister and you only get 1 card and you draw a Mind Twist, maybe you can twist them back and even the score, but not now. All right, so I'm playing against Kess now, and I tried to get something going with Demonic Tutor and Dark Confidant, but my opponent, who also has Demonic Tutored at some point, had the goods and was able to stop that. Fortunately, I've hit some pretty consistent land drops, and I've got a good defensive hand, so I'm able to kind of work to build my hand up into a position where I might be able to start generating some card advantage with that Crucible. Opponent Factor Fictions in response, and I give them the split: Soul Ring, Dark Ritual, or Inquisition, Bribery, and I didn't see the third card actually, Toxic Deluge. So my opponent takes the 3 pile, but really of all of them, the card I most fear is the Inquisition, strangely enough, because it forces me to mana drain here and get a pretty terrible exchange on my mana. And my opponent casts Meltdown. I've already gotten a card off of the Crucible, and I've used my Mana Vault, so I just let it go. I don't force it. But when he tries to cruise 3 cards into hand, I do force that. And on my turn, I dig and find myself a not that exciting hand, but I do get Treachery, and I get to flashback Teachings for a Vamp and play a Mana Confluence and pass, which I can use as a swamp and take less damage. So my opponent bribes here for a Trinket Mage, and I'm figuring out Soul Ring, but he gets a Phyrexian Furnace, strangely enough. And with that, I am going to try to win the game right now, as my opponent only has 1 mana untapped and no alternate mana sources. So take some damage from Mana Crypt, but I get to go Treachery, tap my lands after I see that it resolves, so I can untap exactly what I want to untap. Tap for even more mana. We're going to run out Armageddon first so that my opponent can't Spell Snare it. And then, after my opponent, if my opponent were to float a blue, for example, for a Spell Snare, or maybe float a blue for some kind of counter magic or whatever that they might be able to play, I'm going to drop. Let's say my opponent had, the other thing was, let's say my opponent has Daze here, for example. If they were holding like Daze and Force of Will, they could Daze this, but then I could play Cavern of Souls and they still couldn't Force of Will their way through that. So at least I would have a board presence. But yeah, Armageddon followed by an uncounterable Breya and a land drop. My opponent wants nothing to do with that and goes ahead and scoops. It was one of the weakest treacheries ever. I treacheryed a Grey Ogre, but hey, it was the only Grey Ogre on the board. All right, so finally I get to play against Osmano Osmanos Goonie. So that was a little painful to work out. His opponent's playing Duretti, throws away a Workshop and has a Mox Diamond and a Guardian Idol. So this is not a pushover build here. This is, and obviously we're in the finals. So I end up having to throw away my Throne because of my opponent's Guardian Idol, making it way too risky. And when my opponent goes for a Wheel of Fortune with an almost empty hand, I end up remanding it, fortunately finding myself a Forbid, which means it's time to drop my Gilded Lotus into Necro, and then I'm going to over Necro into a blue card so I can force with the blue card and then Forbid lock my opponent with a Necro, except I find no blue cards. How annoying is that? So I know I have to force a will with my Forbid unless my opponent doesn't give me a target. Well, he's got a good target, Combustion Gear Hulk. Too much damage, I think. So we're going to have to let that go. But it's Armageddon time, and followed by an immediate drop of Breya and tons of mana in play. Plus, I get to Necro for 7 right off the bat. But I decide, because my opponent could go land Wheel here, I only take 4 cards. So if he does nothing, I can use the 4 cards. If he does something, I have... If he does nothing, I have a play, because I won't get a draw phase. I need some cards in my hand. And if he does something, like Wheel, then I've only lost 4 cards, which is equivalent of 4 life, rather than losing 7. So here I'm going to over Necro again because I'm looking to close this game out as quickly as possible. Opponent goes for a Chalice, and that's an easy counter bounce. The key here is I'm trying to keep my opponent off Duretti and off enough mana to play Duretti ever, ideally. So now I'm able to go Stoneforge into Sword. We'll get the Sword down, equip using the Wasteland, attack, and then it untaps the Wasteland. Beautiful. Let's strip that Dust Bowl away. Play a Karn, make a 13/13, and a Skull Clamp, and only Necro for 1, which was a huge mistake. So I'm going to pause the game one last time, this time on purpose. And the reason that was a huge mistake is that my opponent had a Mox Diamond and a Darksteel Citadel, and I was at 7. I did not need to Necro for 1. I have a completely dominant game-winning board position against almost no mana. By Necroing for 1 and going to 6 and tapping out to do it, what I've done is I made it so that if my opponent goes Mountain, Chain Lightning, Lightning Bolt, I lose the game. This is insane and was totally, like, that was the worst thing I could have done. I should have not Necroed for 1, just tried to win with the cards in my hand. And if something goes drastically wrong, I do have Breya to gain life, and I have Skull Clamp on some flyers to gain cards. Either way, I'm not Necro locked, not by a long shot. Here's some life here. Fortunately, my opponent was not able to kill me and just gets a mere Battle Sphere into play, which isn't going to do much here. And I ponder into a Disenchant, which is really nice. So I go ahead and fetch, equip, smash. He's got to block the 13/13, of course, except I sent it to Ready, so he did not have to block. He takes 4, and the reason I did that was because it doesn't matter. He's dead on board. So damage, kill him, and I still have 2 mana up. So if my opponent had some kind of trick where he could find a way to deal damage to me while tapped out, I still had 2 mana left, and I could throw another 2 artifacts at him and finish him off in response to his final move, whatever that might be. So pretty good stuff. Fun. The deck certainly works nicely. Karn is as nuts as usual, spitting out 2/14. These guys were 14/14 at one point. That's pretty good for 4 mana. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed it. So as you could see by the pauses, I am mildly busy this evening, and so I actually don't have time to play today. Those were from yesterday. So I won't be able to offer you anything fresh for tonight. But since you haven't seen the video, I guess that'll have to do until tomorrow, when I expect to get some good gaming going, and we'll hopefully be able to provide some more, hopefully winning videos, but certainly entertaining videos at the very least. Thank you very much for watching. That's all I've got today, and I'll see you next time.